Analyzing the data is important when you're determining whether you've had a good cycle from a bad cycle. I think this also allows the farmer to fine tune and continue with his successes or fix his failures, you know.
Welcome everyone, this is MTech Podcast. My name is Nikolai Shitikin and I have Jim Johnson with me as my favorite co-host, and we have a guest today, it's Philip Dickinson. How you doing, gents?
Hi guys, hi Nick.
Hey Nick, hey Jim, how's it going? All good, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you, and well, let's discuss.
Yeah, hey, fantastic that we've got you, Philip, because I know you're a guy that's really passionate about chickens and the poultry industry, and that effectively that's who we like to speak to on the podcast. So looking forward to having a chat. Just to introduce Philip Dickinson is the Managing Director of Munters South Africa and been involved with that organization since I understand the late 1990s, 1999, Philip. So you've been in the position or in the company anyway for a long time, and you have a real passion for chickens. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, guys. It's an honor. Thanks.
Yeah, and the first question, as usual, how you started with agriculture, how you got into this area, and what keeps you here for such a long time.
I think, as Jim has alluded, you know, I joined Munters in late 1999, and I was directly involved in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. A little bit of work into the greenhouse, the broiler, the layer, just supplying evaporative cooling pad. But with Munters acquiring more and more companies throughout the year, you know, our product portfolio increased. And then I got a lot more involved in the design and the supply into the broiler and the layer industry. I think what really attracted me to Munters Sweden, to Munters was primarily I was going to travel to Sweden, which was fantastic. But then sort of just the understanding and the love of the diversity. You know, one minute I'll be sitting in a consulting engineer's office talking about heating, ventilation systems. The next breath I'm in a breeder or a broiler farm, you know. So, and it was always fascinating to me, you know, just understanding the science behind the growth of the animal and how ventilation played a huge part in that. So yeah, it's chicken. As I said to Jim last night, I love chicken, you know, so it's good.
We all do.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, we all love chicken, Philip. We all do. And yeah, it's you're talking about ventilation. You've obviously been involved in that now for quite a few years. It's a really critical area if we're going to get poultry to perform competitively. So, you know, what do you see as the main ventilation principles that should be known by everybody on, you know, at farm level and in the industry?
Jim, you know, after our discussion yesterday, I had a bit of a review and spoke to some of my colleagues in the industry as well. And I think it comes down to sort of three ventilation principles. It's giving the bird the correct temperature curve for the right age of the bird at any specific time. I think that's very important. The birds that they must receive, the right minimum ventilation in cubic meters per hour at all times based on their specific weight. And most of the breeds, you know, your Avigens or your Ross, your Cobb birds, they're all very, very similar in terms of what they need from an oxygen perspective. So that's also very important. And it's also how you're heating and ventilating. And when you're cooling, you should have subtle changes in the house. It shouldn't be just a very immediate reaction, you know, oh my gosh, it's cold outside, so we need to heat. You need to bring these changes in subtly because the bird does not like erratic changes. So I think those are probably the three things when it comes to ventilation principles that is quite important.
And talking about the ventilation principles and equipment and growing chickens, there's like the growing chicken or any other animal is quite complicated process, and there are many aspects to it, from feeding to growing principles to like anything. And the equipment is quite a big part of it because they all living into those sheds. And when it comes to ventilation, for example, what kind of advices you can give, or what farmers and growers should pay attention to when it comes to selecting or tuning ventilation equipment?
I think, you know, every equipment supplier has a different sort of methodology in terms of, you know, their design criteria. But, you know, the farmer should be able to question the reasoning why he's getting 10 fans in, or, you know, some side ventilation fans, or how many inlets, etc. So there's a very simple sort of calculation, and we look at three different aspects. Well, I do. We look at the cross-sectional area of the house, and there's a formula. It's quite a simple formula. It's quantity of air equals velocity times area. The surface, or the cross-sectional area, is normally based on the gable end and the pitch of the roof. And the velocity is based on what the bird would like, based on climatic conditions outside. We normally work on about a 2.5 meters to 3 meters per second. So there we have two values in that equation, which we can work out the total air quantity required for that specific house. Then it's just a very simple calculation. You have a pressure rating on the fan, which will also give you a cubic meters per hour figure, and you just divide that into it, and that's where you would come up with your tunnel ventilation requirement in terms of ventilation. I mean, in cubic meters, apologies. We also have to look at the other one, and I mentioned that in my previous comment, you know, that you're giving the bird the right amount of cubic meters of air at any one time. And that is normally outlined by breed specification. The third one that we also looked at was, or we do look at, you know, you can have a cross-sectional area of a house which will be similar, but a house may be longer. So you could have a 120 meter house versus a 150 meter, but the cross-sectional area is the same. So there you need to look at a factor of safety there and say, if the house is longer, we want to try and air exchange every minute. You know, because there you're going to be giving, you're going to have a longer sort of transition from entering the house in terms of air to exiting the house. And normally the first point that I mentioned is normally the safest option because it gives you the ample amount of air. It covers the ventilation required due to the breed specifications. And there's also a little bit of a factor of safety in there, which is always good for those extreme conditions.
Okay, Philip, I mean, it really is an interesting area, and there's a lot to think about when you're looking to ventilate birds correctly. And people often focus on, you know, older birds and older birds' ventilation requirements, but quite often I walk into day-old placements and houses that are all nicely sealed up. The guys are saying, okay, energy's expensive, I don't want, you know, I want to retain the heat in the house, and they close everything up, and the birds are 2, 3, 4 days old and they haven't opened anything up, and that creates potentially problems. So there's a lot of emphasis around ventilation right from day one. And how do you get that healthy balance? How do you strike a balance there between conserving cost and energy and making sure your birds are getting enough oxygen?
I think it's a very important point, Jim. Yeah, and I think sometimes too much air or too little air, bad distribution can be damaging, you know. If you're pulling too much air, you're going to be chilling the birds. You'll also have bad migration inside the house. You know, you'll have places where the birds would go into a slightly cooler place or a slightly hotter place. That could also lead to disease, you know, in the grow out phases of the bird itself. But it also can cause damage. You know, if you have them migrating into various places, you know, they're going to be stepping on each other, etc. You probably get higher wet litter areas, etc. You know, so I think one of the best advice I can give, you know, is that the farmer, yes, you have all this hardware and software, but the farmer literally needs to sit down and view what the birds are doing, and they will tell you how to manipulate your controller or your ventilation settings as you go through the cycle itself.
Yeah, and we already discussed this a little bit with Jim in our previous podcast, that observation is one of the key tools under the belt of any farmer. And that's really important. And with the variety of different types of technologies for cooling and air treatment, there are like always the cooling pads are standing out. What are the challenges with them, Philip, based on your experience?
I think when it comes to cooling, I mean, ventilation is just the primary movement of air. Heating is using an energy source to get where you want to be. When it comes to cooling, you know, there's probably three different types of thought where you can cool just with wind speed itself. You can also, there was a new trend that was going around South Africa in the sort of the milder regions here, where they were putting misting systems in, but it certainly does come with its challenges. You know, the issues that, are you evaporating the water enough? It could cause wet litter, you know, so there's some sort of very hard thumb sucks when it comes to how much are you cooling in terms of a misting system. Where you come back to cooling pad, you know, it gives you a more precise control. There's planned or theoretical calculations that can be determined, you know, and I think one of the benefits thereof is you are evaporating on a molecular level. So there is no water carryover into the actual house. Despite the fact that you are increasing the relative humidity, you're not doing it on a droplet level, you know. So if the quantity of air is not evaporating the water holistically in a misting system, you may cause the problem there. There's also, we spoke about this, there's, you know, there's different cooling pads for different applications. We normally look at a 4-inch pad or a 4-inch pad or a 6-inch pad. And these are used for different cooling efficiencies and cooling applications. I think where the benefit of a 6-inch pad or a 150 millimeter pad comes in is you can run it at a higher velocity, which will also say that your pad face area is smaller. Okay, so there's a cost saving in that as well, because your pad area is going to be smaller, and your dog box or your dog house and the building structure where it's housing the cooling pad would be a little bit smaller. So yeah, we have, like I said, we have different pads for different applications. The popular pad that we supply into our higher heated areas is 7060. It's okay, I'm punting the equipment now, but it's the Munter 7060 150 millimeter pad. Very high efficiency, low pressure drop. So yeah, that's that on misting versus cooling.
All right.
Yeah, really interesting. You know, the fact you've got to get not just the fans and the ventilation, the airspeed, but you also got to manage the cooling system. You know, that was one of the things I found in my 7 years in South Africa, is the diverse climates you have in that country. So, you know, you've got customers in the Western Cape, which kind of Mediterranean type climate, and then you've got the Highveld up in Johannesburg, Pretoria, you know, really challenging environments and very different. And you need to tune in that ventilation system, I guess, and specification to your particular region and climate. Very important. And then you mentioned, you know, that there's quite a lot of technology around, controllers are evolving, there's a lot of sensoring now done in houses on a routine basis. A tremendous amount of information is collated in order to get the right ventilation for the birds or the age of birds specifically in the house. But in gathering all that data, there's surely a fantastic opportunity for analysis, data analysis of all that information as it relates to the performance of the birds.
Yeah, yes, Jim. I mean, that's an important part. Analyzing the data is important when you're determining whether you've had a good cycle from a bad cycle. I think this also allows the farmer to fine tune and continue with his successes or fix his failures, you know. Most advanced controllers nowadays, you know, store data for one cycle. And that can be converted into an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. But I think also just having MTech and cloud-based data analysis platforms, you know, more advanced analytics can be done and can be stored. And like I said, you know, if he's having a good cycle, he can learn from that and duplicate into other houses. And if he's having a bad cycle, you know, what can he do to what can he do to fix? So that's very important. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, analysis is getting really, really big now. And since, like we mentioned, there are sensors all over the place in the chicken shed, so we can analyze all the data and do valuable conclusions. But the reality is that not all the equipment everywhere is brand new. And if we talk about ventilation equipment, it has quite a long lifespan, right? And some houses are using quite old equipment and old technology, and it's still working fine if it maintained all right. But what could be some like hidden drawbacks from that, Philip?
You know, as we mentioned right in the beginning, you know, with that formula of the quantity of air, you know, that's on a brand new house. That's assuming that the house is sealed 100%. We're making an assumption that we're getting a 2.5 meter a second airspeed through the house. We're assuming that the cooling pad is extremely clean. It doesn't have any sort of deposits on it, and increases pressure drop. We're making assumptions also that, you know, the pad or the V-belts on the fans are not slipping. So there's a lot of sort of different aspects that you can assume that right in the beginning from day one, and you would run through a year's full of a year's cycle, that we're still running at the optimum conditions, but that's not necessarily so, you know. So that, I think it comes back to that data analysis, you know, that if there is something over a period of time that, you know, your performance is dropping slightly, the reasoning why behind that, you know, is your, like I said, is your cooling pad clean? Do we need to start looking at, you know, the fans, the V-belts, etc.? Do we need to start looking at additional technology? You know, when I first joined Munters, we were supplying box fans. Box fans was the way to go, you know. Now what they've started to do is they've started looking at cone fan technology, where you're kind of extending the Venturi effect. So you can run slightly, you can run lower horsepower motors to try and achieve the same kind of airflow. So there's a lot of sort of new technology that is coming out. And you know, that's one of the things that we do as well is, you know, we try and base, when we do a sale, it's not just a sale and we pocket the cash, you know, it's teaching them maintenance programs, et cetera, you know, to try and get the longevity out of their products, to ensure that you're getting the optimum condition, like the 2.5 meters a second, or the correct cooling efficiency. The fan is running at a specific pressure, so it's producing so much air, et cetera. So that's one of the big challenges. But you know, if you're upfront with the farmer itself, they normally would adhere to it, you hope. But it's always good to replace pads from time to time.
So it comes down to the conclusion, for me at least, that even if everything is working fine on the old equipment and it's maintained, and you can still be running at the same speeds and expecting good results, but there could be some minor things that will be all cumulatively affecting the performance of the cooling and air quality, and then you will have to run equipment at the higher speeds and you know, at higher performance that can also affect the cost of running that equipment.
Of course, yes, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, and it's been great just discussing these things with you, Philip, and your knowledge comes across in terms of that whole ventilation and the need to ventilate correctly, but specification right from the outset on a new house, key to making sure that you've got the ability and the capacity to operate a ventilation system that's going to suit the climate wherever your customer, wherever your farm is located. It's really interesting talking to you about that and the importance of cool pads and the variations in air speeds you can get with different types of cool pads and how they relate to different parts of the world. That's really interesting. And of course, technology now, and Nick and I are really very interested in anything techie when it comes to how we operate our chicken businesses nowadays. And there's a lot of technology about which generates control, gives people remote access to control and ventilation systems, but also gathers an enormous amount of data that can be powerfully used to analyze and then help improve. We're always in anything that helps us continually improve and become more and more competitive in terms of our production of poultry is really, really interesting. And good reminder at the end that you've got to maintain this equipment. If you expect the performance and your birds to perform, you've got to maintain the cool pads. You've got to maintain your fans. You've got to keep them clean. You've got to keep them operating as near the original specification as we possibly can. And then I loved the bit at the end where you just touched on just a little glimpse of the future in terms of energy efficient ventilation and fans and motors and stuff. And there's no doubt that that's the way we're fast moving towards being able to be more environmental, our environmental impact, our use of, you know, fuels and energy and electricity. We're all going to move to become more efficient in that regard. So it's great that you touch on the future there too. Really enjoyed the chat with you today, and thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Just in my summary quickly, I mean, I think what's important, you know, from a ventilation perspective, the bird is evolving on a genetic level all the time. So the bird is actually demanding this. It's not the mere fact that we would like to supply you another fan. The actual bird is determining the future, you know. So yeah, it's been a real pleasure to spread a little bit of my knowledge. I learn every single day. And yeah, let's keep in touch moving forward.
Yeah, sure, Philip. Thank you very much for joining this podcast, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And if you don't want to miss any new episodes, please follow us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And see you next week in the next episode.
See you all next week. Thanks, Philip.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.